Juliet and Pedro were the heart and soul of their small village nestled in the rolling hills of Brazil. Their friendship had been forged in childhood, bound by countless adventures through the lush fields and whispering forests surrounding their homes. The village itself was a picturesque place where time seemed to slow, and life moved at a gentler pace. Every morning, the sun would rise over the hills, casting a golden glow over the cobblestone streets and whitewashed cottages. Juliet and Pedro were inseparable, their bond a testament to years of shared dreams and whispered secrets. They often spoke of the future, dreaming of exploring the world beyond the horizon, yet always returning to their beloved village. Julia, with her bright eyes and infectious laughter, harbored dreams of becoming a successful businesswoman. Pedro, with his adventurous spirit and unwavering determination, aspired to travel and write about his experiences. One fateful afternoon, the sky was a brilliant blue, and the village was alive with the sounds of children playing and vendors calling out their wares. Juliet and Pedro had decided to take a drive into the nearby town to gather supplies for a village festival. The road was winding, bordered by fields of wildflowers swaying gently in the breeze. They laughed and sang along to the radio, their spirits high and carefree. But as they rounded a particularly sharp bend, disaster struck. A truck, barreling down the opposite direction, swerved into their lane. Pedro, at the wheel, tried desperately to avoid the collision, but it was too late. The impact was catastrophic, the sound of metal crunching and glass shattering echoing through the serene landscape. The car was thrown off the road, tumbling down a steep embankment before coming to a halt, crumpled and smoking. In the aftermath, the silence was deafening. Julia, barely conscious, reached out weakly for Pedro, her vision blurring. She saw him slumped over the steering wheel, blood trickling down his face. Panic surged through her, but darkness quickly swallowed her. When Julia awoke in the hospital days later, her body ached, and her mind was foggy with pain and confusion. Her parents stood by her bed, their faces etched with worry and sorrow. Through their tearful explanations, she learned the devastating news: Pedro was gone. His body had not been found in the wreckage, and despite the search efforts, he was presumed dead. The grief was overwhelming, a crushing weight on Julia's heart. She clung to the memories of their time together, the laughter, the shared dreams, and the unspoken promises. Her life, once filled with vibrant plans and boundless optimism, was now a shadow of its former self. The village mourned with her, a somber veil hanging over the community that had lost one of its brightest stars. As Julia slowly recovered, she realized that staying in the village was impossible. Every corner, every familiar face, every whisper of the wind reminded her of Pedro and the life they had envisioned. With a heavy heart, she made the difficult decision to leave, seeking solace and a fresh start in the bustling city where she could lose herself in the anonymity and noise. Years passed, and Julia built a new life in the city. She pursued her dreams with a fierce determination, channeling her grief into success. Yet, despite the achievements and accolades, a part of her remained frozen in that moment, on that road, in that car, with Pedro. Unknown to her, far from the village and her new life, Pedro had survived the accident. Suffering from severe amnesia, he had been found and taken in by a family in a distant town. He had no recollection of his past, of Julia, or of the dreams they had shared. His life was a blank slate, filled with fragments of memories that never quite made sense. He lived under a new identity, haunted by a sense of loss he couldn't fully understand. Their paths, once intertwined so closely, had diverged dramatically. But fate has a way of bringing things full circle, and the time would come when their lives would intersect once more, forcing them to confront the past and the secrets they had buried deep within their hearts. In the bustling heart of São Paulo, Julia found a different kind of rhythm to life. The cacophony of the city, with its constant hum of traffic and ceaseless activity, was a stark contrast to the quiet, pastoral village she had left behind. It was in this vibrant chaos that she sought to lose herself, to escape the memories that haunted her. Julia channeled her grief and pain into her work, climbing the corporate ladder with a relentless drive that left little room for anything else. Her ambition paid off, and she quickly became known as one of the most formidable businesswomen in the city. Her days were filled with meetings, negotiations, and endless tasks that kept her mind occupied and her heart at bay. She met Enrique during one of these hectic days. A charismatic and intelligent man, Enrique was the kind of person who could light up a room with his presence. He was drawn to Julia's strength and resilience, and she found comfort in his steady, reliable nature. Their relationship grew naturally, providing Julia with a sense of stability she desperately needed. Enrique was aware of Julia's past, though she rarely spoke of it. He respected her silence, understanding that some wounds took longer to heal. Despite this, he couldn't shake the feeling that a part of Julia remained closed off, a part that even he couldn't reach. Yet, he loved her deeply and was willing to wait for her to fully let him in. Life with Enrique was comfortable and predictable, a welcome respite from the tumultuous emotions that had once dominated Julia's existence. They moved in together, sharing a modern apartment overlooking the sprawling cityscape. Enrique's presence was a constant source of support, his steady hand guiding Julia through the ups and downs of her demanding career. Despite the success and apparent contentment, a lingering sense of incompleteness gnawed at Julia. She often found herself staring out at the horizon, her thoughts drifting back to the village, to the life she had once envisioned with Pedro. The memories were like ghosts, always present, always just out of reach. Enrique noticed these moments of introspection, the faraway look in Julia's eyes that appeared whenever she was lost in thought. He tried to engage her, to draw her back into the present, but the past's hold on her was strong. Still, he remained patient, hoping that one day Julia would fully embrace the life they were building together. Julia's work continued to thrive, and she became a prominent figure in the business community. She was frequently featured in magazines and invited to speak at conferences. Her success was undeniable, and yet, each milestone felt like a hollow victory. The applause and accolades did little to fill the void left by Pedro's absence. As she navigated this new chapter of her life, Julia couldn't help but wonder about Pedro. Had he truly perished in the accident, or was there a chance he had survived, just as she had? The questions plagued her, fueling her late-night musings and haunting her dreams. Despite the love and support from Enrique, Julia's heart still yearned for closure, for answers that seemed forever out of reach. The city, with all its noise and distraction, provided a temporary refuge, but it could not erase the past. Deep down, Julia knew that she would eventually have to confront the memories she had tried so hard to escape. Little did she know, the answers she sought were closer than she ever imagined, and the reunion with Pedro would bring more than just closure, it would force her to face the secrets and truths that had shaped her life. Pedro had spent the past few years in a haze of uncertainty. Found unconscious and without identification after the accident, he had been taken in by a kind family in a small town far from Julia's village. The doctors diagnosed him with severe amnesia, his mind a blank slate devoid of memories of his previous life. He adopted a new identity, taking the name Marcos, as suggested by the family who had found him. With their support, he rebuilt his life from scratch. Though he was grateful for their kindness, a persistent sense of loss lingered within him, like a puzzle missing a crucial piece. Fragments of memories would occasionally flash in his mind, an image, a scent, a fleeting emotion, but they never coalesced into a coherent whole. Marcos made a modest living as a freelance writer, his natural talent for storytelling earning him a small but loyal following. His articles and short stories, often tinged with a melancholic nostalgia, resonated with readers who sensed the depth of his unspoken pain. Despite his success, the feeling of incompleteness gnawed at him, driving him to seek answers about his past. One day, driven by an inexplicable urge, Marcos decided to visit São Paulo. The bustling metropolis called to him with an unfamiliar yet undeniable pull. He rented a small apartment in the city and began exploring its streets, hoping to jog his memory. The city's vibrancy and chaos were a stark contrast to the quiet town he had come to know, but something about it felt oddly comforting. As he navigated the city's labyrinthine streets, Marcos found himself drawn to a particular neighborhood, its mix of modernity and history resonating with something deep inside him. It was here, amid the towering skyscrapers and bustling markets, that his life would change forever. On a bright, sunny afternoon, Marcos entered a quaint cafe, its rustic charm a respite from the urban sprawl. He ordered a coffee and took a seat by the window, his eyes drifting to the world outside. As he sipped his drink, a familiar figure caught his eye. Across the street, Julia stood, her expression a blend of determination and introspection as she spoke animatedly with a colleague. Marcos's heart skipped a beat. Though he couldn't place her, something about her felt intimately familiar. A rush of fragmented memories and emotions flooded his mind, her laughter, her touch, her presence beside him. Overwhelmed, he stood abruptly, his coffee spilling onto the table. Julia, sensing someone's gaze, turned and locked eyes with Marcos. For a moment, time stood still. Recognition flickered in her eyes, followed by shock and disbelief. She took a hesitant step forward, then another, until she was standing at the cafe entrance, her face pale and eyes wide. "Pedro," she whispered, her voice trembling with a mix of hope and fear. Marcos stared at her, the name reverberating in his mind. Pedro. It felt right, yet foreign, like a word in a forgotten language. I don't know," he replied, his voice hoarse. "I don't remember." Tears welled up in Julia's eyes as she reached out to touch his arm, needing to confirm he was real. "It's you," she said softly, conviction growing in her voice. "It's really you." Marcos felt a surge of emotion, a tidal wave of joy and sorrow. Though his mind was still clouded, his heart recognized her. "Julia," he said, the name slipping from his lips with surprising ease. How is this possible?" They sat together in the cafe, the world outside fading as they talked. Julia recounted the years since the accident, her voice breaking as she spoke of the pain of believing he had died. Marcos listened, piecing together the fragments of his past with each word she spoke. Though many memories remained elusive, the bond they shared was undeniable. Their reunion was bittersweet, marked by the joy of rediscovery and the pain of lost time. Marcos, now aware of his true identity, grappled with the implications of his new life. Julia, overjoyed yet fearful of the changes this revelation would bring, clung to the hope that their love could overcome the years of separation. As they left the cafe, the sun setting behind them, both knew that this was just the beginning. The road ahead would be fraught with challenges and revelations, but for the first time in years, they faced it together. The shock of seeing Pedro alive left Julia in a daze. As they walked through the busy streets of Sao Paulo, she clung to his arm, afraid that if she let go, he might vanish like a figment of her imagination. Pedro, now going by Marcos, was equally disoriented, struggling to reconcile the fragments of his memory with the reality before him. They found a quiet park nearby, a small oasis amid the city's relentless pace. They sat on a bench, the air heavy with unspoken words. Julia took a deep breath, trying to steady her racing heart. "I thought you were dead," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "All these years, I believed you were gone." Pedro's brow furrowed as he tried to piece together the missing years. "I don't remember much," he admitted. "After the accident, I woke up with no memory. A family found me and took me in. They named me Marcos." Julia listened, her heart aching for the pain he must have endured. "I left the village because everything reminded me of you," she said. "I moved here, started a new life, but I never forgot you." Pedro reached out and took her hand, the touch familiar yet new. "I wish I could remember everything," he said softly. "But seeing you, it's like a part of me has come back to life." The sound of approaching footsteps interrupted their conversation. Enrique, having followed Julia's frantic call earlier, appeared with a concerned expression. His eyes widened in shock as he took in the sight of Pedro. "Julia, what's going on?" Enrique demanded, his gaze shifting between her and Pedro. Julia stood up, her mind racing to find the right words. "Enrique, this is Pedro. The friend I told you about, the one I thought I lost in the accident." Enrique's face hardened as he processed the information. "Pedro? But how?" "It's a long story," Pedro said, standing beside Julia. "I don't remember much, but I'm trying to piece it together." Enrique's eyes narrowed, suspicion creeping into his voice. Why now? After all these years, why show up now? Julia stepped closer to Enrique, trying to calm him. It's a miracle, Enrique. We need to understand what happened, and Pedro needs our help. Enrique's jaw tightened. We? Julia, we've built a life together. How does he fit into that? The tension between them was palpable. Pedro felt the weight of the years he had missed and the life Julia had created without him. He didn't want to be the cause of turmoil in her world, yet he couldn't deny the pull he felt towards her. Enrique, please, Julia pleaded. This is as much a shock to me as it is to you. But Pedro is a part of my past that I can't ignore. We need to help him find the answers. Enrique took a deep breath, his expression softening slightly. Fine. But this doesn't change what we have, Julia. We need to figure this out together. Pedro nodded, grateful for the tentative truce. Thank you, Enrique. I don't want to disrupt your lives. I just want to understand mine. As the evening shadows lengthened, they left the park, each lost in their thoughts. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with challenges and unresolved emotions. But for now, they had each other, and that was a start. The following days were a whirlwind of emotions and discoveries for Julia, Pedro, and Enrique. They spent hours together, piecing together Pedro's fragmented memories and attempting to fill in the gaps. Despite the tension between Enrique and Pedro, a sense of shared purpose began to emerge. They were all committed to uncovering the truth about what had happened and how Pedro had survived. One evening, Julia decided it was time to involve her closest friend, Beatriz. Beatriz had been Julia's confidant through the years, supporting her through the loss of Pedro and the subsequent rebuilding of her life. She invited Beatriz over, hoping her presence would provide some much-needed perspective. As they sat in Julia's living room, Beatriz listened intently to the incredible story of Pedro's survival and the rediscovery of his identity. Her eyes widened in shock, but a flicker of something else, guilt, perhaps, crossed her face. This is unbelievable, Beatriz said, her voice tinged with disbelief. Marcos, how are you holding up? Pedro, who had been quiet, looked up. It's overwhelming, he admitted. But having Julia and Enrique's support helps. I just want to understand what happened. Beatriz nodded, her expression thoughtful. There's something I need to tell you all, she said slowly. Something I've kept hidden for years. Julia and Enrique exchanged glances, the air thick with anticipation. What is it, Beatriz? Julia asked, her voice steady despite the unease creeping into her heart. Beatriz took a deep breath, steeling herself. I was the one who called for help after the accident. I was nearby and heard the crash. When I arrived, I saw the wreckage and Pedro was unconscious, but alive. I stayed until the emergency services arrived. Pedro's eyes widened. You were there? Beatriz nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. Yes, and I've felt guilty ever since. I didn't tell anyone because I was scared. Scared that I couldn't save you both, scared that I failed. Julia reached out, her hand trembling. Why didn't you tell me? I was ashamed, Beatriz whispered. Ashamed that I couldn't do more. And then, when you left for the city, I thought it was best to leave it all in the past. But now, seeing Pedro here, I realized that keeping this secret was wrong. Enrique, who had been listening silently, finally spoke. Beatriz, this changes everything. If you were there, you might know something that can help Pedro recover his memories. Beatriz wiped her tears, nodding. I remember seeing a man arrive just before the ambulance. He looked official, like someone with authority. He was the one who took Pedro's details and promised to get him help. Pedro's mind raced, the image of the man triggering a flash of memory. I remember him, he said slowly. He said he would take care of everything. But after that, it's all blank. Julia squeezed Pedro's hand. We need to find out who that man was. Maybe he holds the key to your past. Beatrice agreed. I'll help in any way I can. I'm so sorry for keeping this from you. Pedro offered her a reassuring smile. You did what you thought was best. Now, we need to move forward. With Beatrice's revelation, a new sense of urgency gripped them. They began to search for any records or leads that could identify the mysterious man who had taken charge at the accident scene. Enrique used his connections to dig into hospital records and local reports from the time of the accident, while Julia and Pedro focused on contacting anyone who might have witnessed or known about the man. Days turned into weeks, and their efforts started to bear fruit. They discovered that the man was a government official responsible for overseeing emergency responses in the region. His name was Rafael Souza, and he had retired shortly after the accident. Armed with this information, they tracked down Rafael, who now lived in a quiet suburb on the outskirts of Sao Paulo. Nervous but determined, they approached his home, hoping that he could provide the answers Pedro needed to fully reclaim his identity and his past. Rafael Souza's house stood in a tranquil neighborhood, a stark contrast to the storm of emotions swirling within Julia, Pedro, and Enrique as they approached his door. The well-maintained garden and tidy exterior did little to calm their nerves. Julia knocked, her heart pounding in her chest. A few moments later, an elderly man with kind eyes and a calm demeanor opened the door. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice gentle yet curious. "Mr. Souza," Julia began, her voice steady despite the nerves, "my name is Julia, and this is Pedro and Enrique. We believe you might have information about an accident that happened several years ago. Pedro was involved in that accident, and we've been trying to piece together what happened." Recognition flashed in Rafael's eyes as he looked at Pedro. "Pedro. I remember you," he said slowly. "Please, come in." They followed Rafael into his cozy living room, where he gestured for them to sit. "I retired shortly after that accident," he began, settling into an armchair. "But I remember it well. It was a tragic day. You were severely injured, Pedro, and I took charge of ensuring you received immediate care." Pedro leaned forward, his eyes locked on Rafael's. "I don't remember much from that time. What happened after you took me to the hospital?" Rafael sighed, his gaze distant. "You were in a coma for several weeks. When you woke up, you had no memory of who you were or what had happened. Given your condition and the lack of identification, the hospital contacted me to help figure out your identity." He paused, his expression somber. "It was decided that you would be moved to a smaller facility where you could recover without the pressure of the media or the curious public. I arranged for your transfer and hoped you would regain your memory in time." Julia felt a surge of gratitude and frustration. "Why didn't you contact anyone in the village? We all thought Pedro was dead." Rafael shook his head. "I tried, but the information we had was limited. The crash had destroyed most records, and without a name or any leads, it was difficult to trace your family or friends. I did what I thought was best for your recovery." Pedro absorbed this information, the pieces of his past slowly coming together. "Thank you for taking care of me," he said quietly. "But now, I need to know everything. Do you have any records or details that could help fill in the gaps?" Rafael nodded and stood up. "I kept a file on your case, just in case you or someone came looking for answers." He left the room briefly and returned with a worn folder. "Here it is," he said, handing it to Pedro. Pedro opened the folder with trembling hands, Julia and Enrique leaning in to see. Inside were medical records, notes, and a few photographs from the accident scene. As they pored over the documents, Pedro's mind began to clear, the fog lifting with each piece of information. One photograph caught his eye, a blurry image of him being carried from the wreckage by Rafael. The sight triggered a flood of memories, vivid and intense. He remembered the sound of the crash, the pain, and the sense of loss as he realized Julia was no longer beside him. "I remember now," Pedro whispered, tears welling in his eyes. "I remember the accident, and I remember you, Rafael. Thank you for saving my life." Rafael placed a reassuring hand on Pedro's shoulder. You were strong, even then. I'm glad you found your way back. As they left Raphael's house, Pedro felt a sense of closure. The past was no longer a mystery, and with each step forward, he felt more like himself. Juliet and Enrique walked beside him, their support unwavering. Together, they faced the future with renewed hope, ready to tackle the challenges that lay ahead. With Raphael's information, Pedro's memories started to fall into place, but there were still gaps that needed filling. Julia, Enrique, and Pedro decided to visit the hospital where Pedro had been treated after the accident, hoping to uncover more details about his recovery and the mysterious circumstances surrounding his memory loss. The hospital, a large, modern facility, was bustling with activity. They approached the reception desk and explained their situation. The receptionist, after a few phone calls, directed them to Dr. Marta, who had overseen Pedro's case years ago. Dr. Marta, a middle-aged woman with a kind but tired face, greeted them warmly in her office. "I remember this case well," she said, glancing at the folder they had brought from Raphael. "Pedro was in a critical condition when he arrived, and it was a miracle he survived." Pedro nodded, feeling a mix of gratitude and anxiety. "I don't remember much from that time. Can you tell us more about my treatment and recovery?" Dr. Marta leaned back in her chair, thinking. "When you woke up, you were disoriented and had no memory of who you were. We ran various tests, but the amnesia was persistent. The decision to transfer you to a smaller facility was made to ensure you had a peaceful environment to recover." Julia, sitting beside Pedro, squeezed his hand. "Why didn't anyone contact us? We thought he was dead." Dr. Marta sighed. "There was no identification, and despite our efforts, we couldn't trace your family. It was a challenging situation. We did everything we could to support your recovery, Pedro." Enrique, who had been silent, finally spoke. "Is there anything in the records that might help us understand why Pedro's memories didn't return sooner?" Dr. Marta nodded and opened Pedro's file. "We did note some unusual brain activity. It was as if certain memories were being actively suppressed, possibly as a result of the trauma. The transfer to a quieter facility was supposed to aid in natural recovery, but the brain can be unpredictable." Pedro's mind raced as he processed this information. "So, my brain was protecting me from the trauma?" "It's possible," Dr. Marta said gently. "Trauma can manifest in many ways. Your mind might have suppressed memories to help you cope with the initial shock and pain." As they left the hospital, Pedro felt a sense of clarity. His past was no longer a shadowy enigma but a series of events shaped by trauma and survival. He was grateful for the care he had received and the people who had helped him along the way. Back at Julia's apartment, they sat together, the weight of the day's revelations pressing down on them. Enrique broke the silence, his voice calm but firm. "Pedro, I understand this is a lot to take in, but what does this mean for us? For you and Julia?" Pedro looked at Enrique, then at Julia, his expression one of determination and hope. "I don't know what the future holds, but I do know that I want to understand my past fully. And I want to be part of Julia's life again, if she'll have me." Julia's eyes filled with tears. "Pedro, you've always been a part of me, even when I thought you were gone. But we need to take this one step at a time." Enrique nodded, though the pain in his eyes was evident. "We'll figure this out together. It won't be easy, but we'll find a way." In the days that followed, they continued to piece together Pedro's past, each revelation bringing them closer to the truth. The journey was far from over, but for the first time, Pedro felt like he was truly coming home. The support of Juliet and Enrique gave him the strength to face the challenges ahead, and the hope that love could indeed transcend time and tragedy. The days turned into weeks as Pedro, Julia, and Enrique continued their journey of rediscovery. They spent countless hours talking, sharing memories, and uncovering the truths that had been hidden for so long. However, the more they uncovered, the more tension began to build between them, especially between Enrique and Pedro. One evening, after a particularly intense discussion about the future, the tension reached a boiling point. Enrique, unable to contain his frustration any longer, confronted Pedro. "Pedro, we can't keep avoiding this conversation," Enrique said, his voice tense. "What are your intentions with Julia? You've come back into our lives, and everything is upside down." Pedro, equally frustrated, stood his ground. "I don't intend to disrupt your lives, Enrique. But Julia and I have a history that can't be ignored. I'm just trying to understand my place in all of this." Julia, sensing the rising tension, stepped between them. "Both of you, stop. This isn't helping. We need to focus on what's important, finding out the truth and figuring out how we move forward." Enrique's expression softened slightly, but his eyes still held a hint of anger. "Julia, I love you. I've stood by you through everything, but I need to know where I stand. Are you and Pedro, are you going to pick up where you left off?" Julia took a deep breath, her eyes filled with both love and uncertainty. "Enrique, I love you too. But I can't deny the connection Pedro and I have. We need to take this one step at a time, and I need you to trust me." Pedro, seeing the pain in Enrique's eyes, spoke up. "Enrique, I respect the life you and Julia have built together. I don't want to come between you. But I need to be a part of this process, for both Julia and myself." Enrique looked between them, the struggle evident in his expression. Finally, he nodded. "Fine. But we need boundaries. We need to figure out a way to do this without tearing each other apart." The agreement was tenuous, but it was a start. Over the next few days, they established a fragile truce, each working to navigate the complicated dynamics of their relationship. They focused on uncovering more details about Pedro's past, hoping that understanding the full story would bring some clarity to their present situation. Beatrice, sensing the tension and wanting to help, decided to reveal another piece of her own secret. She invited them to her apartment one evening, her demeanor nervous but resolute. "There's something else I need to tell you all," Beatrice began, her voice shaking slightly. "After the accident, I received a letter. It was from Rafael. He had found a diary among Pedro's belongings and sent it to me, thinking it might be important." Julia, Pedro, and Enrique exchanged surprised glances. "Why didn't you tell us before?" Julia asked, her tone a mix of curiosity and frustration. Beatrice sighed. "I was afraid. Afraid of what the diary might contain, and afraid of how it would affect all of you. But I realize now that keeping it hidden was wrong." She handed the diary to Pedro, who took it with trembling hands. As he opened it, he saw entries written in his own handwriting, memories captured on paper that he had long forgotten. The entries detailed his dreams, his fears, and most importantly, his love for Julia. Reading through the pages, Pedro felt a wave of emotions crash over him. He looked up at Julia, his eyes filled with tears. This is who I was. And this is who I still am, deep down." Julia's eyes mirrored his emotions. "We'll figure this out, Pedro. Together." Enrique, standing beside them, placed a hand on Pedro's shoulder. "We will. All of us." The diary became a beacon of hope, a tangible connection to the past that guided them through the uncertainties of the present. With each entry they read, they grew closer, not only to understanding Pedro's past, but also to forging a path forward that included all of them. As the days went by, the fragile peace between Julia, Pedro, and Enrique began to solidify. They pored over Pedro's diary together, each entry bringing them closer to understanding the person Pedro had been and the life he had lost. The diary was a treasure trove of memories, filled with descriptions of the village, their shared dreams, and Pedro's deep love for Julia. One evening, after reading a particularly poignant entry, Julia felt a knot of emotions tighten in her chest. She excused herself and walked out to the balcony, needing a moment alone. Pedro and Enrique exchanged a look, concern etched on both their faces. "I'll go check on her," Pedro said softly. Enrique nodded. "I think that's best. She needs you right now." Pedro stepped out onto the balcony, finding Julia leaning against the railing, staring at the city lights. The cool evening breeze ruffled her hair, and she shivered slightly. "Julia," Pedro began, his voice gentle. "What's on your mind?" She turned to face him, her eyes filled with unshed tears. "Reading your diary, it's like I'm getting to know you all over again. And it's making me realize how much I've missed you, how much I still love you. But I'm so confused, Pedro. My life with Enrique, it's real, and I love him too." Pedro moved closer, taking her hands in his. "Julia, I understand. I don't want to come between you and Enrique. I just want to be honest about how I feel. I've always loved you, and I never stopped, even when I couldn't remember." Julia's tears spilled over, and she pulled him into a hug. "I don't know what to do. I feel like I'm being torn in two." Enrique watched from the doorway, his heart aching. He stepped outside, joining them on the balcony. "Julia, you don't have to make a decision right now. We'll figure this out together, remember?" Julia looked between them, her two loves, and nodded. "I just need time. Time to understand my feelings and what I truly want." Pedro and Enrique both agreed, respecting her need for space. They returned inside, the atmosphere charged with unresolved emotions. The days that followed were a delicate dance, as they tried to balance their complex feelings while continuing to support each other. One afternoon, as they were sifting through more of Pedro's diary, Julia received a phone call that would change everything. It was a job offer, an opportunity to expand her business internationally, something she had always dreamed of. The catch? It required her to move to New York for at least a year. Julia's mind raced as she weighed the decision. The offer was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, but it came at a pivotal moment in her personal life. She knew that accepting it would mean leaving Pedro and Enrique behind, at least temporarily, and she wasn't sure if their relationships could withstand the distance. She called a meeting that evening, gathering Pedro and Enrique in the living room. "I have something important to tell you both," she began, her voice steady but tinged with uncertainty. "I've been offered a job in New York. It's an amazing opportunity, but it means moving there for a year." Enrique looked stunned, while Pedro's face was a mix of pride and concern. "Julia, that's incredible," Pedro said. "But what about us?" Enrique nodded in agreement. "We support you, Julia, but this is a huge decision. How do you feel about it?" Julia took a deep breath. "I want this job, but I don't want to lose either of you. I'm torn. I need to know what you both think." Enrique reached out and took her hand. "I love you, Julia. And I want you to follow your dreams. We'll find a way to make it work." Pedro nodded. "Enrique is right. We'll support you, no matter what. But we need to be realistic about the challenges. We need to be honest with ourselves and each other." Julia felt a rush of gratitude and love for both men. "Thank you. I need some time to think this through. But knowing I have your support means everything to me." In the days that followed, Julia grappled with her decision. She knew that whatever choice she made would require sacrifices, but she also knew that she had the strength and the love to face whatever came next. Julia spent the next few days in deep contemplation, weighing the job offer against the complexities of her personal life. The support from Pedro and Enrique was unwavering, but the decision felt heavier with each passing hour. One evening, she found herself wandering through the city, seeking solace in the familiar bustle of Sao Paulo. She ended up at a small park, the same one where she and Pedro had reunited. The memories flooded back, overwhelming her. Sitting on a bench, she let the tears flow, the weight of her indecision pressing down on her. Back at the apartment, Pedro and Enrique waited anxiously. The tension between them had eased somewhat, replaced by a shared concern for Julia. When she finally returned, her face streaked with tears, they both rose to meet her. "I can't do this," Julia said, her voice breaking. "I can't choose between my dreams and the people I love. It's tearing me apart." Pedro stepped forward, his expression filled with empathy. "Julia, you don't have to choose. We'll support whatever decision you make." But you need to be true to yourself. Enrique nodded, his eyes filled with worry. We'll find a way to make it work. But you need to take care of yourself first. Julia felt a wave of gratitude for their understanding. She took a deep breath, trying to steady her emotions. I need some time alone, she said softly. I need to clear my head. Both men nodded, respecting her need for space. Julia retreated to her room, closing the door behind her. She sat on her bed, the silence pressing in on her. For the first time in a long while, she felt truly alone, the weight of her decision crushing her spirit. As the days turned into a blur, Julia sank deeper into despair. She struggled to find clarity, her mind a battleground of conflicting emotions. She avoided Pedro and Enrique, unable to face them while she was so lost. The once comforting apartment felt like a prison, the walls closing in on her. One morning, Beatrice visited, her concern evident. Julia, you need to talk to them, she urged. Shutting them out won't help. Julia shook her head, tears welling up again. I don't know what to say. I feel like I'm failing everyone, including myself. Beatrice took her hand, squeezing it gently. You're not failing anyone. You're human, and this is a difficult situation. But you can't do this alone. Let them in. Julia knew Beatrice was right, but the fear of hurting Pedro and Enrique paralyzed her. She spent another sleepless night, her thoughts a chaotic mess. In the early hours of the morning, she made a decision. She couldn't keep running from her feelings, she needed to face them head-on. Gathering her courage, Julia approached Pedro and Enrique, who were sitting in the living room, their expressions somber. I need to talk to you both, she said, her voice trembling. Pedro and Enrique looked up, their eyes filled with concern. Of course, Julia, Pedro said softly. We're here for you. Julia took a deep breath, the words tumbling out. I can't keep avoiding this. I'm scared of making the wrong choice, of losing everything I care about. But I realize now that I need to be honest with myself and with both of you. Enrique stood up, moving closer to her. We understand, Julia. We're all in this together. Whatever you decide, we'll support you. Pedro nodded in agreement. We'll face it together, Julia. You're not alone. Julia felt a flicker of hope. For the first time in weeks, she felt a sense of clarity. The path ahead was still uncertain, but she knew that with Pedro and Enrique by her side, she could find a way forward. Julia felt a renewed sense of determination after her conversation with Pedro and Enrique. Though the path ahead was uncertain, she knew she couldn't avoid her feelings any longer. She decided to take a few days off work to focus on her relationships and to make peace with the choices she had to make. The next morning, Julia suggested they all take a trip to the village where she and Pedro had grown up. She believed that returning to their roots might help them gain perspective and find the clarity they all needed. Enrique agreed, albeit with some hesitation, while Pedro felt a mix of nostalgia and apprehension. As they drove towards the village, the familiar landscape stirred memories in Pedro. The rolling hills, the lush fields, and the quaint houses brought back flashes of his childhood and the life he had shared with Julia. Enrique, too, found himself appreciating the simplicity and beauty of the village, seeing it through Julia's eyes. They arrived at Julia's family home, where her parents welcomed them warmly. The sight of the old house, with its charming garden and cozy interior, filled Pedro with a sense of belonging. Julia's parents were overjoyed to see him, their eyes brimming with tears as they embraced him. Over the next few days, they explored the village together. Julia showed Enrique and Pedro the places that held special meaning, the tree where she and Pedro had carved their initials, the stream where they used to play, and the hilltop where they had dreamed of their future. These shared experiences rekindled a sense of connection and understanding among them. One evening, they sat around a bonfire in the backyard, the crackling flames casting a warm glow on their faces. Julia's parents joined them, sharing stories of the past and reminiscing about the good times. The atmosphere was relaxed and filled with laughter, a stark contrast to the tension that had plagued them in the city. As the night grew darker and the stars emerged, Julia turned to Pedro and Enrique, her expression serious yet serene. "Being here has made me realize how much this place means to me," she said softly. "It's a part of who I am, just like both of you are a part of my life." Pedro nodded, his eyes reflecting the firelight. "This village shaped us, Julia. It's where our story began, and it's a part of who we are." Enrique, who had been listening quietly, finally spoke. "I can see why this place is so special. It's given me a better understanding of your bond and your history. And I want to be a part of that too." Julia smiled, her heart swelling with gratitude. "We've all come a long way, and we have a long way to go. But I believe we can find a way to make this work, as long as we're honest with each other and ourselves." Pedro reached for her hand, his grip firm and reassuring. "We'll figure it out, Julia. Together." Enrique placed his hand over theirs, creating a circle of support and unity. "Yes, together." The days spent in the village brought them closer, helping them to see each other in a new light. Julia found herself feeling more at peace, her heart lighter as she considered her options. The job in New York was still a significant opportunity, but she realized that her happiness depended not just on her career, but on the people she loved. Before they left the village, Julia made a decision. She called the company in New York and negotiated a compromise. She would take the job but work remotely from Sao Paulo for the first 6 months, allowing her to balance her career and her personal life. When she shared her decision with Pedro and Enrique, they were both supportive. "It's a perfect solution," Pedro said, his eyes shining with pride. "You get to pursue your dreams without leaving everything behind." Enrique nodded in agreement. "And we'll be here to support you every step of the way." As they drove back to Sao Paulo, Julia felt a sense of optimism and hope. They had faced their past, navigated their emotions, and found a way to move forward together. The future was still uncertain, but they were ready to face it, hand in hand. Returning to Sao Paulo with a renewed sense of purpose, Julia threw herself into both her work and her relationships with Pedro and Enrique. The remote job arrangement allowed her to balance her ambitious career goals with the personal life she was determined to nurture. The dynamics between the three of them grew more harmonious as they each found their place in this newly formed, unconventional relationship. Enrique and Pedro, though initially wary of each other, began to find common ground. They bonded over their shared love for Julia and their commitment to supporting her in every possible way. One weekend, the three of them decided to attend a charity event organized by Julia's company. It was a formal affair, filled with influential businesspeople and philanthropists. Julia, elegant in a midnight blue gown, was in her element, moving gracefully through the crowd, introducing Pedro and Enrique to her colleagues. Pedro, now more confident in his role in Julia's life, engaged in conversations with genuine interest, his charm winning over those he met. Enrique, too, found himself enjoying the evening, his initial apprehensions fading as he saw how happy Julia was with both of them by her side. During the event, Julia took the stage to give a speech about the charity's mission. As she spoke, Pedro and Enrique watched her with pride, their eyes reflecting the admiration and love they felt for her. Julia's words were passionate and inspiring, a testament to her dedication and drive. After the speech, as the applause died down, Julia returned to Pedro and Enrique, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "Thank you both for being here with me tonight," she said, her voice filled with gratitude. "It means the world to me." Pedro smiled, his hand gently squeezing hers. "We wouldn't miss it for anything. You were incredible up there." Enrique nodded, his eyes shining with pride. "You inspire us, Julia. We're lucky to have you in our lives." As the evening progressed, they enjoyed the festivities, dancing and laughing together. The event marked a turning point, solidifying their commitment to each other and their shared future. The next few months flew by, filled with both challenges and triumphs. Julia's work thrived, her business expanding under her careful guidance. Pedro continued to explore his writing, drawing inspiration from his rediscovered memories and the new experiences he was sharing with Julia and Enrique. Enrique, too, found fulfillment in his work, his relationship with Julia providing him with a newfound sense of purpose and stability. One evening, as they sat together in their apartment, enjoying a quiet dinner, Julia felt a sense of contentment she hadn't experienced in years. "I've been thinking," she began, looking at both men with a warm smile, "about our future." Pedro and Enrique exchanged curious glances. "What do you have in mind?" Pedro asked. Julia took a deep breath, her eyes filled with hope. "I want us to continue building this life together. I know it's unconventional, but it works for us. I want us to be a family, in whatever form that takes." Enrique reached out, taking her hand in his. "I agree. We've come this far together, and I can't imagine my life without either of you." Pedro nodded, his heart swelling with emotion. "We've faced so much already. Whatever the future holds, we'll face it together." They spent the rest of the evening talking about their dreams and plans, the conversation filled with laughter and love. They discussed travel, future projects, and the possibility of starting a family. Each idea, each plan, felt like another step towards the future they were all committed to creating. The journey had been long and fraught with challenges, but they had found their way back to each other. Their bond, forged through shared pain and joy, was stronger than ever. As they looked towards the horizon, they knew that their love, unconventional as it might be, was real and worth fighting for. Together, they faced the dawn of a new beginning, ready to embrace whatever the future had in store. The following months were a time of growth and transformation for Julia, Pedro, and Enrique. They continued to navigate their unique relationship, finding joy and fulfillment in their shared life. The bonds between them deepened, strengthened by their commitment to honesty, communication, and mutual support. Julia's remote work arrangement proved successful, allowing her to manage her international projects while staying connected to her roots in Sao Paulo. Pedro's writing flourished, his stories infused with the rich tapestry of his experiences and the love he had rediscovered. Enrique found new opportunities in his career, his confidence buoyed by the stability and happiness he found at home. One sunny afternoon, they decided to take a trip to the beach, a place that held special significance for all of them. The sound of the waves crashing against the shore, the salty breeze, and the warmth of the sun created a perfect backdrop for their day together. As they walked along the shoreline, hand in hand, Julia felt a profound sense of peace. She looked at Pedro and Enrique, her heart swelling with gratitude. "This is perfect," she said softly. "Being here with both of you, it feels like everything has fallen into place." Pedro smiled, his eyes reflecting the same contentment. "We've come a long way, haven't we?" Enrique nodded, squeezing Julia's hand gently. "And we have so much more to look forward to. Together." They found a spot on the beach and set up a small picnic, enjoying the simple pleasures of food, laughter, and each other's company. As the sun began to set, painting the sky with hues of orange and pink, they sat together, watching the horizon. Pedro turned to Julia and Enrique, his expression serious yet hopeful. "I've been thinking a lot about our future. About how we can continue to build this life together." Julia nodded, her eyes shining with love. "I've been thinking about that too. And I believe that as long as we stay true to ourselves and to each other, we can handle anything that comes our way." Enrique smiled, his gaze steady and reassuring. "We've faced so many challenges already. Whatever the future holds, we'll face it together. As a family." The word family hung in the air, a promise and a commitment to the journey they were all on. It was a journey that had taken them through pain, loss, and rediscovery, but it had also brought them to this moment of unity and love. As the last rays of sunlight dipped below the horizon, they stood together, arms around each other, looking out at the endless sea. The future was unknown, but it was also filled with possibility and hope. They knew there would be challenges ahead, but they also knew that they had the strength to face them. Their love, unconventional and unique, was a testament to their resilience and their unwavering belief in each other. Together, they stepped forward, ready to embrace whatever lay beyond the horizon, their hearts united in a bond that would carry them through all the adventures and trials that life had to offer.